Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is the desktop lecture for Module 3. This week we have an assignment due. It's called a primary source assignment. So let me tell you what a primary source is as opposed to a secondary source first, because you'll need to know that to complete your assignment. A primary source historically is a document that was written by somebody who was actually alive at the time or at the event of the time. And a secondary source is something that was written by someone who wasn't alive at the time or wasn't near the event at the time and wrote about it. So actually a book writing about history is a secondary source, and a document that came from a historical time, like the Declaration of Independence, is a primary source document. So as historians, what we do is we look at archives, we try to find letters, we try to find maybe real estate records or government documents that were written, at the time, and we call those primary sources, and those are the most reliable pieces of information to us as we're trying to put a historical narrative together. So really, the secondary source is something that is written afterwards about the event. And so generally considered, primary sources have more credibility, or at least they give us a window into the historical narrative. So this week you're going to read a primary source document called the Federalist Paper number 10, and it was written actually by James Madison. And once you get into the assignment, there's a link, you can click on it, and you can go to that document online. And I want you to read through that document, and then there's some questions for you to answer. If you're watching this video, you're going to have the inside track. I talk about there's a word that Madison uses continually in Federalist number 10, and the word is faction. So think about factions for a minute. And the reason it's important is think about the Revolutionary War and what is going on in the United States at the time. And it's actually not officially the United States yet. So in the colonies at the time, there are these things that we've read about in previous chapters. So especially taxation, the Stamp Act, unfair taxes and duties that have been levied on the colonists, at least in their eyes. And also know that King George and the Parliament in England were making all the rules for the colonists. So this notion of Parliament and one powerful group sort of running the country, it flies in the face of liberty. So when Madison's talking about factions, he's trying to guard the new government that's going to be set up under the Constitution. He's trying to guard the government from being taken over by a faction or a group that's too powerful. And it stands to reason, because we just fought the Revolutionary War to break away from this faction known as Parliament, and we want to make sure that people have a voice and that one party can't take over the country and have a lock on it. So if you look at our government today, the way it's set up with the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, and then also the bicameral, that means there in the legislation, bicameral means there's two houses. So there's a Senate and a House of Representatives. It's all set up so not one faction can take over. And it also explains the electoral college system, in that all states have somewhat of an equal say in who can become president. And that helps from one strong state or one strong group of people from gaining control over the government. So that's really what Federalist number 10 is about, and that's why Madison is writing the way he is because we just came off of this terrible period of being represented by people that were deemed unfair. So that's the key to the assignment. As far as the readings are concerned, Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, I would say, are the two important chapters of this text as far as I'm concerned, because it really talks about the formation of the Constitution, which is the exact same document we live under today. So nothing's changed. Prior to the Constitution, we operated underneath the Articles of Confederation through the Continental Congress, and that was just a loose affiliation where the colonies agreed to work together, especially in the Revolution. But there were a lot of issues with that. There were no mechanisms for a common currency, no mechanisms for a common taxation. There were a lot of war debts, and not all states or colonies were equal as far as what they could pay. So the idea of a federal government under the Constitution was what was being debated as you read through Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. And again, this notion of federal government was scary to a lot of people because they didn't want a strong body like Parliament taking over government of the colonies. And it's what we live with today. In some loose sense, the Republican Party is really represents people who want less government regulation. They want the federal government to have less power. And the Democratic Party's core belief is that federal government is good in the sense that it can help people who need help, whether it is through something like Social Security, Affordable Care Act, that sort of thing. So these debates are really relevant to the way we live today. So when you read through Chapter 7, you're going to read about the first Constitutional Convention in 1787. That's when the states first got together to talk about writing a constitution that would form the federal government. And after they wrote the Constitution, the states had to ratify it, and that wasn't really easy. When you read Federalist Paper number 10 for your assignment, part of the deal was that the Federalist Papers were actually propaganda pieces that ran in newspapers that were for the Federalist position. The Federalists were pro-federal government. They were pro-Constitution. So Alexander Hamilton, Madison for sure, not so much Thomas Jefferson. He was afraid of too much power in the federal government. So Chapter 7 is cool because it talks about the formation of all that stuff. And then Chapter 8, once you get into it, it talks about the Constitution and the notion of the Bill of Rights, how in order for it to be ratified, there had to be a promise made that there would be a Bill of Rights. So the first 10 amendments to the Constitution are the Bill of Rights. So that, the biggies, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, Second Amendment, freedom to have arms, and then all the other freedoms against cruel and unusual punishment, the right to have a fair trial, all of those big ones that are the Bill of Rights. Those are actually the first 10 amendments that were tacked onto the Constitution, and they were all designed to give people rights and create a federal government that didn't have so much power that they could impose their will on the people. There had to be a right to a trial. There had to be the ability to respect laws. There had to be the ability to have free speech, the ability to assemble if you wanted to, that sort of thing. And I think most of us run into some Bill of Rights, freedom of the press, right to bear arms on a pretty regular basis still, or at least we hear about it on the news. So that's why these chapters are important. They talk a little bit about the banking system, the United States Bank under Hamilton, so this idea of a central economy is starting, although that's going to change. And also there's still rebellions going on because you have a people that are moving out. They're out in the country. They want their rights. So you're going to read about the Whiskey Rebellion. Then you're going to read about John Adams and the Alien and Seditions Act, which is sort of this attempt to make people quiet again, which doesn't go well. So there's a lot of great stuff in these chapters. You have a big assignment this week. I hope you're all doing real well, and I'll talk to you again soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.